You know, I think many will agree with me. When you're younger, particularly out my generation, maybe even a little younger, and indeed certainly a little older, you were always sort of told, weren't you, to just shut up, speak when you're spoken to, and more importantly, don't fidget, don't touch your face, you know, all those sort of things, chums, you know what I'm saying? And of course, when you are young, you pick up things that the adults miss because you're bored, you're looking around, you're thinking, when are we leaving? You promised to go soon, etc. And adults seem to be talking forever, don't they? But of course, it comes in handy, you know, really, when you think about it, because as I've often said, I've been lucky enough in my life to interview so many fascinating people. And because they were younger at that time, their memories of certain stories are totally different to the ones that are put out there. And because they were there, of course, they have a very rare insight. A couple of years back now, I was lucky enough to interview this man, Ricky Martin. Oh, no, not the hip swiveler. No, we're talking about Ricky Martin, the son of the legendary and brilliant Dean Martin. He came into the studio because he was doing a series of concerts over here in the United Kingdom, and we kept in touch and got on like a house on fire. Debonair, suave, exactly like his father, and more importantly, equally as talented. But of course, it was the stories about growing up in the golden age of Hollywood that truly made me smile, because consequently, you get some rare insights, as I said. Now, this particular rare insight made me sort of think, wow, it just proves, well, some might say, how big certain individuals' egos are. Now, way back in 1951, the Duke of Edinburgh, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, really more or less, I would say, invented the charity record. And I mentioned this in a previous video. He basically sort of said a few words forwarded from the Frank Sinatra single, If She Would Ever Look My Way. And this was really all to raise funds for a charitable cause that was very close to the Duke of Edinburgh's heart. He sold incredibly well. It was about open green spaces for children to play in, particularly after the war years when so many things were bombed out. You know, Prince Philip did a lot of good that a lot of people do not realise, you know, his award scheme, stuff like that, but they really live on today. Frank Sinatra was absolutely delighted, as was Ava Gardner. They were newly married and they were now mixing, of course, with the elite of British royalty. But where it gets fascinating is, and I always love these stories, as I say, because you look at it and you think, wow, you know, and as I said, I've been lucky enough to interview these sort of sons and daughters of many famous people over the years. And they were just, you know, what we call in the North earwigging, listening around, you know. I mean, Ricky Martin told me a wonderful story about Marilyn Monroe turning up every night just for a drink on the way home after filming Something's Got to Give, a very final film for 20th Century Fox. And as he pointed out, his insight was nothing like anybody'd written about, but nobody'd ever bothered to contact him to say, what do you remember about this international icon turning up into your living room every night and sitting with your mom Jeannie and Dean and just discussing the day's filming before she went on to a very final home? You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? These are the people that would have the stories. But you see, back to Frank Sinatra, what was interesting was that Frank decided in 71, when he was given his first retirement tour, right, that he thought, well, what a great idea, or somebody did at least, if they had His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh to, you know, introduce him the very final time, etc. Now, according to the source, according to Ricky, this went down particularly well. The Duke thought, well, he did me a favour, I'm more than happy to do the same thing. And this went back and forth. However, closer to the date here in London, on his final sort of night, as it were, the palace got a call, and basically it was Frank Sinatra saying it might not be a good idea because he could be having second thoughts and he didn't want the Duke to have sort of egg on his face. So they both laughed it off, agreed, and said, well, nonetheless, he was coming along to see the concert, the show. Now, again, it gets really interesting because a few years down the line, what Frank decided was that he too could do something in return for the Duke of Edinburgh. And he suggested, get this, chums, that he could, on this sort of conclusion of the Silver Jubilee, on the balcony at Buckingham Palace, alongside the Queen and senior members of the British monarchy, give a very special rendition of She Did It Her Way, you know, the Paul Anka classic that became Frank's classic, right? And there was a bit of a, well, let me have a word with the Queen, you know. Anyway, very politely, of course, they declined, saying, well, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate, she'd be too embarrassed about all the fuss, etc. As ever, diplomacy par none, right? And Frank apparently took this on board. But when you think about it, and it's always lovely, as I say, to share these stories with you, how ahead of his time really was Frank Sinatra, because when you look at it, not only did Brian May from the legendary rock band Queen perform on top of Buckingham Palace at the start of said sort of celebrations a few years later, but wasn't really that the same thing? Yes, the Queen wasn't next to him, but she was in the audience. So consequently, Frank once again was trying to do it his way, but even his way couldn't persuade Her Majesty the Queen. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.